Hello, my name is Anson Asaka. I'm with New Possibilities. And today I want to talk about the whole issue involving Oprah's controversial interview with the BBC. Now, a lot of conservatives have basically gone on a rampage or a temper tantrum because of her interview. They had their panties in a bunch and they're all worked up and aggravated. And they're upset because Oprah Winfrey had the audacity to speak the truth. She mentioned that there's a whole generation of older white people who are so basically indoctrinated with prejudice that they are beyond reformation, that their racism and their prejudice is so ingrained that essentially they can't be transformed. Their views can't be changed or altered. So essentially, that generation has to pass away before we can progress as a nation. And that was one of her points. The other point that she raised is the issue of President Obama and racism. She talked about how a lot of the hostility towards the president and his policies is rooted in racism. And because of this interview, the conservatives, they have gone basically nuts, trying to condemn Oprah Winfrey for speaking the truth. And as usual, they drag out some old sellout Uncle Tom to try to undermine the sister. They bring out Uncle Toms like Allen West. Oh, sellout Uncle Toms, foot shuffling, boot kissing, butt kissing Uncle Toms like Allen West. They bring them out to criticize the sister. They want us to pretend like racism doesn't exist. And they keep talking about the fact that Oprah Winfrey is a billionaire. Even with her billions, she sees the fact that racism exists in America. It still exists today. And she has experienced racism abroad. And so it doesn't matter how rich you are or how powerful you are, you can still be a victim of racism. When Oprah Winfrey went to purchase an item in some foreign country in Europe, she was told that she can't afford a particular item, that she can't even look at the item because they assumed that she was a poor nigger. So they didn't even want to show her the item. So she has experienced racism. And we know for a fact that President Obama has experienced racism. When you look at the number of nominees that were blocked by the Congress, just as an example, President Obama has been blocked, I believe it was 82 times his nominations were blocked in Congress. Compared to all the other presidents since him, their total number of nominations that was blocked, I believe it's around 86. So one president's numbers are close to the numbers of all the previous past presidents in terms of nominations being blocked by Congress. And it's not a coincidence. All of those other presidents have one thing in common. They are white. There's a group of people in power that can't stand to have to see a black man in the White House. They're doing everything in their power to castrate this brother politically. So that's one example. And as Oprah mentioned during her interview, she talked about how Joe Wilson yelled out during President Obama's State of the Union address and called the president a liar. That is racism. What else can it be? When you have prominent politicians talking about the president is shucking and jiving, we know that that's just a racial dog whistle to the haters, the racists, the bigots. When we see that the president's citizenship is constantly questioned, we know that that is rooted in racism. When we see the pictures of the President Obama depicted as a witch doctor, depicted as an Arab terrorist, depicted as a monkey, as an ape, we see that racism is alive and well in America. We see that a lot of this animosity towards the president is rooted in race. When we see people protesting at the White House, bearing Confederate flags as a symbol of their opposition, we see that a racial dog whistle is being blown to the racists, to motivate the racists. So yes, the president is a victim of racism. When we see that some politicians express their utter hatred towards the first African American president, we know that racism is alive and well. And if I'm not mistaken, one of the senators mentioned how one politician said that he can't stand the president. He doesn't want to be around the president. A lot of this hatred and animosity is rooted in race. It's rooted in race. And until we realize that, we won't move forward as a nation. And if we just open our eyes and just look at the realities that we face in America, we know that racism is alive and well. When we look at what happened to Trayvon Martin, when we look at Renisha McBride, when we look at Jonathan Farrell, when we look at Jordan Davis, when we look at Sean Bell, when we look at Amadou Diallo, when we look at the history of Rodney King, we know that racism is alive and well in this country. And for people to think that black people should shut up simply because we got a black president, you got another thing coming. Electing a black man in the White House didn't erase racism in this country. Racism continues to thrive. And for those that have forgotten or want to pretend like racism doesn't exist, we have other examples. During Halloween, people thought it was funny to wear blackface. People wore blackface. There's one man dressed up as Trayvon Martin with his face black and blood on his shirt. And then one of his friends was dressed up as George Zimmerman with a t-shirt on saying neighborhood watchman. And that's one example. Then you have examples of sheriffs. This one particular sheriff who wore blackface and dressed as a slave, pretending to pick cotton. That's the kind of mentality that we're dealing with today. This didn't happen 100 years ago. This didn't happen 5 years ago. It happened a month ago. Wake up. Racism is real.